"Captain, you want us to handle this?" Pollux asked, voice shaking. "They've got ships that could turn us to space dust in a microsecond, and they hate our goddamn guts." Captain Timothy Ramos chuckled to himself, knowing his junior officer was right. But these galactic pansies were in for quite a fucking surprise. After centuries in isolation, withdrawn from galactic affairs, the battered human fleet had re-emerged, ancient dreadnoughts, carriers and battleships bristling with weapons, armor scores thick from endless wars. They hung before the Galactic Council's glistening assembly station, which floated near a bright neutron star. The alien races had long dismissed humans as barbaric primates, especially the warlike Yadirian in their sleek crescent battleships. But an urgent plea from the Council had summoned Earth's relics to action. Some grave threat loomed, and the galaxy needed its mad dogs again. As the shimmering xenoships arranged in a defensive perimeter, turrets protruding, Captain Ramos grinned icily, scarred face illuminated by starlight through the viewport. The aliens wanted to posture and sneer. Fine. His fleet was centuries old, but far from obsolete. Human ingenuity, grit, and bloodlust trumped the galaxy's arrogance every damn time. Ramos barked at Pollux. "Enough whimpering! Signal the ships to hold position. Let's see what these glittery fucks want before we send them crying to their hive queens." He slouched into his command chair, hydraulics hissing, servos whining from overuse. One way or another, the galaxy would learn what humans first truly meant. Ramos would make sure of it. As the tense standoff dragged on, a sleek shuttle emerged from the Council Station's hangar bay. It glided through the blockade of Xeno ships before docking with a heavy clang against Ramos's flagship. "Sir, the Galactic Council requests permission to come aboard," the COMES officer reported. Ramos waved a scarred hand dismissively. "Fuck it, let 'em through. Not like they can do much besides whine at this point." Minutes later, a pompous little Yadirian strutted onto the bridge like he owned the damn place. The lanky grey alien stuck his nose up at the faded consoles, the exposed wiring, the general disrepair of the human vessel. His yellowish eyes settled on Ramos with a look of pure contempt. "Captain Ramos, I'm Ambassador Pollux of the Yadirian people. I have come to inform you that the Galactic Council has declined your species' offer of aid in this conflict," the Xeno sneered. "Your fleet is a relic, your weapons primitive, your presence here an insult to the superior races of the galaxy. The Council finds the very notion that you hairless apes could contribute anything of value to be absurd in the extreme." Ramos said nothing, his face stony as the diplomat droned on, listing the many failings of humanity, the Council's magnanimous patience in allowing them a place at the galactic table, the inevitable downfall of their civilization should they continue to overreach. Suddenly, Ramos's neural link pinged with an alert from the ship AI. His eyes flicked to the tactical display, widening as the alien fleet shifted into an attack posture, weapons hot. Those motherfuckers, it was a setup from the start. Get Ramos and his ships all gathered up, distracted by this windbag, then wipe them out in one fell swoop. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Ramos barked into the ship-wide comms. "Divert power to shields and return fire, full spread." The deck shuddered as the Yadirian fleet opened up, lances of exotic energy slicing towards the human ships. But the refitted shields, reverse-engineered from salvaged xenotech and boosted with human ingenuity, shrugged off the barrage with contemptuous ease. Then the human fleet struck back, missile batteries and railgun turrets and gamma-ray projectors hurling ordnance across the void. Impossibly resilient armor shattered, advanced reactors went critical, sleek alien hulls blossomed into short-lived novas as the human weapons tore them apart. Ramos rose from his chair and stalked towards the trembling diplomat, enjoying the naked fear in those arrogant yellow eyes. Around them, the last of the Council ships broke apart into drifting wreckage. "Looks like you bureaucrats in the Galactic Council bet on the wrong horse," Ramos growled. "You thought you could bully us, push us around, treat us like backwards children. But out here, when the missiles fly and the hulls rupture, all your pretty words don't mean shit. Humanity has been fighting to survive for millennia. This is just one more war to us." He grabbed the lanky Xeno by his gauzy robes and slammed him against the bulkhead, servos whining with the force of his fury. The human-machine interface was imperfect, the decades-old cybernetics causing Ramos constant agony, but it made him strong enough to break this fool in half. "Go back to your masters, little man. Tell them they haven't seen the last of us. The old ways are the best ways, and we're just getting started." The battle was over, but Ramos knew this was only the first salvo in a much larger war. The Galactic Council would never tolerate such an insult, such a loss of face. They would throw everything they had at the human fleet to put them back in their place. Ramos welcomed it. They could bring their worst, and humanity would meet them head-on like they always had. And this time there'd be no holding back, no mercy. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to fight humans with nothing left to lose. Ramos released the sniveling Yadirian diplomat and stalked back to the command chair. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, move to defensive positions around the council station. Keep your guns hot and your sensors peeled. These Xeno bastards might have another trick up their sleeves." As the battered human dreadnoughts took up positions, Ramos's comm officer called out. Ramos's eyes narrowed. Zeta 9 was a small human mining colony on a remote moon, populated by a few thousand civilians, farmers, miners, families, soft targets. His neural link displayed the transmission. The colony's defenses had been overrun. Yadirian troops were slaughtering civilians in the streets. The governor, an old warhorse named Nikolai Petrov, was holed up in the command center with whoever was left, but they were out of time and ammo. The Yadirians had played their hand well, waiting until the human fleet was engaged to hit the colony. Ramos had to make a choice. As the ships peeled off and leapt into warp, consoles flickering with power diverted to engines, Ramos took a deep breath of the stale recycled air, focusing his mind. "Hold on, Nikolai, you tough old bastard. We're coming." The scene on the colony was a vision of hell. Buildings burned, bodies littered the streets, some charred by energy weapons, others torn apart by flechettes. Yadirian troops, all spindly limbs and chitinous armor, marched through the carnage, executing survivors. In the colony's command bunker, Nikolai Petrov crouched behind a barricade of wrecked equipment, blood seeping from a dozen wounds. A handful of militia and civilians huddled behind him, clutching improvised weapons. The Yadirians were at the doors now, cutting through. Petrov checked the charge on his ancient AK-490. Enough for one last mad minute. He was a stubborn old goat, they'd always said. He'd make the Xenos pay for every inch. Suddenly the ground shook with impact tremors, the bunker's screens lighting up with new contacts. Petrov grinned through broken teeth. That crazy son of a bitch Ramos had done it. The human fleet tore into the surprised Yadirian ships in orbit, mass drivers and laser batteries ripping through shielding and armor like tissue paper. Drop pods rained down through the fire, disgorging power-armored Marines into the fray. They fought their way to the command center, bolt shells and plasma pulses filling the air. Ramos ripped the doors away with enhanced servos, ignoring the hail of fire that pitted his armor. He tossed satchel charges to Petrov. "Started the party without us, Nikolai?" The grizzled old governor laughed, prepping the charges. "Thought you'd never make it, you chrome-plated asshole. What's the plan?" "Same as always. Kill the bastards, save the civilians, and raise a giant middle finger to the council. Just like old times." They fought their way out together, Marines providing cover as the remaining civilians were evacuated. Petrov and his militia fell in beside them, decades of experience meshing with the Marines' youthful ferocity. The Yadirians fell back in disarray, retreating to their landing craft under the combined fire of the human forces. Ramos watched them go, face grim behind his visor. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Council had shown its true face today. But so had humanity, bloodied, battered, but unbroken. And they would keep fighting no matter the odds, no matter the cost, for every last soul on every last colony. Let the Council come. The human race would be waiting for them, and there would be no more half measures, no more holding back. "Give me a line to the fleet," Ramos said over the TACnet, watching the civilians huddle in the evac shuttles. "It's time we took this war to the Galactic Council's doorstep." The battle for Zeta 9 was over. The battle for the galaxy was just beginning. Ramos gritted his teeth as the medbot stitched up the seared flesh of his shoulder, the anesthetic barely dulling the pain. They'd given those Yadarian bastards a beating at the colony, but it had cost them. Big time. Reports flooded in from across the fleet. Breached hulls, overloaded reactors, casualties in the hundreds. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry and blood hung heavy on the recycled air. The young officer swallowed hard. "Not good, sir. We lost the Icarus, the Bellerophon, the Taipan, a dozen more damage to hell and back. But we held the line. Those colonists made it out." A comping broke the moment. Urgent, encrypted Earth command. Ramos signaled for Pollux to patch it through. "Captain Ramos." The voice was clipped, strident. The Council just played their hand. Formal declaration of war about 3 minutes ago. Ramos closed his eyes briefly. So this was it. The plunge into the abyss. He'd always known it would come to this in the end. "Understood, Command. What's our play?" A beat of silence, then... "And we have a lead. Possible Council staging ground in the Kuiper Verge. Uninhabited system, massive dark energy readings. They're hiding something out there, Captain. Something big. I'm sending the coordinates now." Ramos's neural link buzzed with the data packet, star maps flickering across his vision. The Kuiper Verge, a desolate stretch of space, uncharted and unremarkable. Until now. "You want us to check it out?" It wasn't a question. "Affirmative. We need boots on the ground, Ramos. Find out what those Council bastards are up to and shut it down. But watch your back. We're hearing chatter about some new kind of alien superweapon. Tread carefully." Ramos glanced at the tactical display, the scattered icons of his battered fleet. They were hurting, stretched thin, jumping into the black on a wild goose chase while those Yadarian fucks still swarmed in occupied space. It grated on him. But orders were orders, and if there was even a chance of getting one step ahead of these alien pricks, he had to take it. "Understood, Command. We'll get it done. Ramos out." He killed the link and pushed himself to his feet, swaying briefly as the new skin on his shoulder pulled tight. "Lay in a course for the Kuiper Verge," he told Pollux. "And tell the Constellation to stay behind with a reserve flotilla. The colonists are going to need a watchdog." "Aye, sir," Pollux hesitated. "Do you really think the Council is hiding some doomsday weapon out there?" Ramos met his gaze, cold and unflinching. The younger man had to learn, and fast. This was a new kind of war, against a new kind of enemy, one that played by its own twisted rules. "I think they're hiding a lot of things, Lieutenant, and it's our job to drag all of it kicking and screaming into the light." He turned towards the view screen, watching the stars blur into starlines as the fleet leapt into warp. Towards the unknown. Towards whatever fresh hell the Council had waiting for them. The human ships dropped out of warp on the edge of the Kuiper Verge, scanners probing the void ahead. At first, nothing. An expanse of dead space, as empty and unremarkable as the rest of this god-forsaken quadrant. Then the sensors lit up like a Christmas tree, a massive dark energy signature spiking off the scale. It was close, whatever it was. "All ships, battle stations!" Ramos barked, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Shields to maximum, weapons hot. I want firing solutions locked and loaded yesterday." The crew scrambled to action, the bridge erupting into controlled chaos. Ramos leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowed at the view screen, waiting. And they were fast, impossibly fast. Ramos had never seen ships move like that, twisting and banking through space like flocks of maddened birds. "Evasive maneuvers," he roared, the deck shuddering under his feet as the first volley of enemy fire slammed into their shields. "Return fire! Full spread!" The human ships scattered, pulse cannons and railguns opening up as they desperately tried to track the darting bioships. But it was like trying to swat flies with a hammer. The alien vessels danced around the flak bursts, their own weapons flaring with sickly radiance. Lances of seething particles, swarms of ravening nanites that chewed through shield and hull alike with horrifying ease. "Mother of God, what are these things?" someone whispered, their voice thick with dread. Ramos had no answer. All he knew was that they were losing this fight, and losing it badly. Their weapons were all but useless, the enemy ships too fast and too resilient, and more of them were pouring out of the void with every passing second. "All ships fall back," he ordered, hating the taste of the words even as he said them. "Regroup at Rally Point Delta, we'll try and—" His words cut off as a new wave of contacts sprang up on the display. A second fleet emerging from warp to flank them on all sides, and this one bore the all-too-familiar markings of the Galactic Council. They'd been suckered, led by the nose into a trap within a trap with no way out. Pollux turned to him, face ashen. "Sir, what do we do?" Ramos looked at the display, at the noose tightening around his fleet's throat, at the tide of monstrous ships swarming towards them, hungry for blood. There was only one thing they could do, the same thing humanity had always done, when the odds were stacked against them and all hope was lost. They could fight, to the last ship, to the last man. "We do what we always do, Lieutenant," he said, his voice cold and clear. "We stand our ground and we make the bastards pay for every inch." He opened a fleet-wide channel, the words pouring out of him like a battle cry. "Attention all ships. This is Captain Ramos. I won't lie to you, we're in the shit. The Council has us boxed in, and these alien freaks are coming to finish the job. They think they've got us right where they want us." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the fear and despair hang in the recycled air, sharp and cloying. "But they're wrong. They don't know who they're fucking with. They don't know what humanity is capable of when we're backed into a corner, when we're fighting for our lives and the lives of everyone we love." He thought of Earth, of the teeming billions who looked to soldiers like him to keep the monsters at bay, of the colony they'd just bled to save, the families huddled in terror as the Yadirians stalked the streets. "So this is what we're going to do. We're going to dig in our heels and we're going to fight. We're going to make them remember why you never ever count the human race out. And if we go down—" He smiled, a cold feral thing. "We're going to take as many of these alien bastards with us as we can. No surrender, no retreat. Humanity forever." A ragged cheer went up from the crew, echoed across the fleet, the sound of men and women ready to sell their lives dearly, to spit in the face of annihilation itself. "I have heard the man," Pollux shouted, his earlier fear replaced by iron resolve. "All hands to battle stations. Let's show these council fucks what happens when you poke the bear." The human ships surged forward, guns blazing, meeting the enemy head-on. The bioships swarmed to meet them, all gnashing teeth and grasping tentacles, while the council ships hung back, content to let their abominations do the killing. It was over. He'd failed. Failed his crew, his people, his species. The council had outplayed them, outsmarted them at every turn. And now humanity would pay the price. But even as the end closed in, as the bioships latched onto his crippled vessel with their hungry proboscises, Ramos felt no fear, no despair. Only a cold, implacable rage, a determination to fight to the last, to make the enemy bleed for every life they took. He thought of his people, of the indomitable spirit that had carried them from the caves to the stars, of the sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness that had seen them through 1,000 wars, 1,000,000 catastrophes. They would lose this battle, but the war was just beginning. And somehow, someway, humanity would find a way to win it, or die trying. Ramos smiled as the bioships tore through the hull, as the stinking darkness of the enemy ship engulfed him. His last thought, as the world dissolved into fire and pain, was a simple one. "Give 'em hell, boys and girls, give 'em hell." Ramos's dying ship shuddered under the onslaught, consoles exploding in showers of sparks, as the bioship's corrosive weapons ate away at the hull. The recycled air was thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded. But even as the end closed in, Ramos refused to yield, his fingers dancing over the weapons controls, firing until the barrels glowed white-hot. Then, through the static and chaos, a transmission cut in, garbled, distorted, but with tantalizing snippets breaking through. Human fleet, ancient weapons, secret base, coordinates. Ramos's heart raced. A friendly voice. Some lost remnant of humanity reaching out across the void. He had to know. "Odysseus!" he barked at the ship AI. "Analyze that transmission. I want those coordinates." As Odysseus worked, Ramos rallied his battered fleet, the survivors forming a desperate shield wall against the encroaching horrors. Railguns and plasma cannons flared, the human ships fighting with every ounce of defiance and fury they could muster. They just needed to hold out a little longer, just a few more minutes. "Coordinates decrypted, Captain," Odysseus reported, triumph in its synthetic voice. "Transmitting to the fleet now." Ramos didn't hesitate. "All ships break contact and set course, full burn." The human vessels peeled away, engines flaring as they raced towards the promised sanctuary, the bioships in close pursuit. Weapons fire stitched the void, shields flaring and hulls buckling. Then the moon appeared, a tiny uncharted speck on the edge of the system. The human ships dove for it like drowning men lunging for a lifeline, even as the Galactic Council fleet closed the net. They hit atmosphere in a storm of fire and thunder, the ships shaking themselves to pieces as they punched through. Ramos gritted his teeth, hands locked on the controls, riding the bucking deck. The human fleet slammed into the moon's surface in a ragged line, gouging mile-long furrows into the rocky ground. But they had made it. Incredibly, impossibly, they had made it. "All hands disembark and form up," Ramos ordered as he stumbled from the wreckage of his bridge. "Bring every scrap of gear you can carry." Outside, the wind howled across the blasted landscape, the distant shapes of the bioships darkening the sky. But Ramos's attention was locked on the massive energy signature pulsing beneath the surface, like a beacon guiding them on. With a squad of Marines at his back, Ramos plunged into the hidden depths of the moon, the rock walls giving way to gleaming metal corridors and echoing chambers. And there, in a vast, vaulted hangar, weapons, glorious, terrifying, magnificent weapons, rows upon rows of armored suits bristling with firepower, gargantuan cannons and sleek fighter craft, their lines strange yet somehow hauntingly familiar. And the power, Ramos could feel it thrumming in his bones, a deep primal resonance that set his teeth on edge. "Mother of God," one of the Marines breathed, "are those—" He turned to his men, the light of newfound determination burning in his eyes. "Mount up and prepare for battle. We've got a galaxy to save." But even as the Marines scrambled to load the ancient arsenal onto their ships, Ramos knew that time was running out. The bioships were closing in, the Galactic Council's trap tightening with every second. They had the weapons. Now they just needed a miracle. As the ancient human weapons hummed to life, their power cores glowing an eldritch blue, Ramos felt a surge of savage joy. At last, a chance to strike back at the alien bastards, to make them bleed for every human life they'd snuffed out. He gripped the command chair, servos whining, as his fleet burned hard for the coordinates of the last battle. But as they dropped out of warp, the scorched and shattered remains of their lost ships drifting in the void, Ramos felt a chill run down his spine. The Council fleet, the bioships, they were gone. Only the dead remained, frozen in the silent vacuum. "All ships' eyes peeled," Ramos growled into the calm. "Those Yadarian fucks are up to something. Stay sharp." The human dreadnoughts crept forward, scanners probing the debris field. Shards of metal pinged off the shields, the wreckage of their fallen comrades, their tomb among the stars. Suddenly the view screen flickered, an incoming transmission. Ramos tensed, signaling Pollux to patch it through. The screen resolved into a sneering Yadirian face, all sharp angles and malevolent eyes. "Captain Ramos," it said, voice dripping with disdain. "I am Admiral Zorg of the Galactic Council. Your fleet is surrounded, your weapons useless. Surrender now, and your deaths will be relatively painless." Zorg's sneer morphed into a vicious grin. Foolish primate. The bioships were just the beginning. Behold the true power of the Council. The view screen flared, and Ramos gaped in disbelief as a massive wormhole yawned open before his fleet. And through that swirling portal, a sight that turned his blood to ice. Ships, hundreds of them. A Council armada that dwarfed his own battered fleet, fresh and hungry for slaughter. And at their heart, a monstrous dreadnought, its hull pulsing with eldritch energies. Quantum entanglement, Ramos breathed, pieces clicking into place. You clever bastards, lured us in, then popped in your big guns for the killing blow. Zorg's grin widened, madness dancing in his eyes. Your species is a blight, Captain, an infection that must be scoured from the galaxy. And now, with this technology, nowhere will be safe from our cleansing fire. Not even your precious Earth. Ramos snarled, a pure sound of fury and defiance. Fuck you and fuck your cleansing fire. All ships engage the enemy. The human fleet surged forward, their ancient weapons spitting sun-bright beams of destruction. The Council ships reeled, their shields shattering like glass as the dreadnoughts ploughed through their ranks. Ramos watched with savage satisfaction as Zorg's dreadnought staggered under the onslaught, its hull buckling, atmosphere bleeding into space. Then the Council fleet struck back, and the void lit up like a supernova. Lances of exotic matter, seething beams of anti-protons, missiles that punched through shields and hull like a fist through paper. It was like fighting the fury of an angry god. Ramos held on as his ship bucked and heaved, alarms shrieking, damage reports flooding in. They were hurting the Council, but not enough, not nearly enough. And now they were trapped, the wormhole at their backs, the enemy on all sides. Suddenly, Odysseus's calm voice cut through the chaos. Captain, quantum fluctuations increasing exponentially. The wormhole is destabilizing. Collapse imminent. Ramos' blood ran cold. If that portal collapsed with them still inside. He made the call, hating himself even as he gave the order. All ships, fall back! Fight your way clear of the wormhole, now! The human fleet wheeled, pouring fire into the Council ships as they clawed their way back towards the exit. But the enemy pressed in, sensing weakness, hungry for the kill. Ramos watched his screens in mounting horror as ship after ship fell out of formation, consumed by the Council's onslaught. They weren't going to make it. They were going to die here, lost in some twisted pocket of space-time, forgotten by the universe. Then a miracle, a sliver of starlight shining through the maelstrom, the wormhole's exit tantalizingly close. Punch it, Ramos roared, and the human ships lunged forward, a last desperate surge. Zorg's dreadnought loomed before them, trying to block their escape, weapons blazing. But Ramos had one last trick up his sleeve, one last weapon scavenged from that ancient moon base, never fired in anger until now. A lance of pure seething energy erupted from his ship's prow, a spear of blinding white light. It struck Zorg's dreadnought square on, and the mighty vessel simply shattered, dissolving into a billion glittering fragments, a kaleidoscope of destruction. And then they were through, the wormhole collapsing behind them with a silent howl of tortured space-time. Ramos sagged back in his chair, gasping, as his ship shuddered and groaned around him. They'd made it, battered, broken, but alive, and they'd bloodied the Council's nose in the bargain, shown them that humanity would not go quietly into the night. But the lost weapons of Earth were in human hands once more, and Ramos swore by all the stars in the sky he would make the aliens pay for every drop of human blood they'd spilled. This was just the beginning. The galaxy would tremble before they were done. Ramos stood on the bridge of his battered flagship, watching the wreckage of Zorg's dreadnought drift past on the viewscreen. The taste of victory was bitter in his mouth, tainted by the knowledge that the war was far from over. Suddenly the sensor console pinged an alert. Captain, we've got incoming ships on the edge of the system. Unknown configuration. Ramos tensed, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. After the Council's treachery, he was taking no chances. Hail them and keep the guns hot. Moments later, a vaguely familiar Yaderian face appeared on the screen. But instead of the sneering arrogance Ramos had come to expect, this one radiated grim determination. "Captain Ramos, I am Admiral Cruz of the Yadarian Resistance. We come in peace." Ramos narrowed his eyes, memories of Pollux's betrayal still fresh. "Forgive me if I don't take you at your word, Admiral. The last time I trusted a Yadarian, it didn't end well for my people." Cruz inclined his head. "I understand your skepticism, Captain, but I assure you we are not all like Pollux or the Council. Many of us have been fighting their tyranny for years, dreaming of the day we might overthrow their rule. And now, with your victory here, that day may finally be at hand." Ramos considered this, his tactical mind weighing the potential benefits of an alliance against the risks of another betrayal. "And why should I believe you? What proof do you have of your sincerity?" A ghost of a smile flickered across Cruz's angular features. "The coordinates, Captain, the ones that led you to the cache of ancient weapons. Where do you think they came from?" Ramos's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. Cruz had been the mysterious benefactor, the one who had given them the key to their salvation. But why? "I had hoped you would find the weapons," Cruz explained, as if reading his thoughts, "that you would use them against the Council, as we could not. You were our last best hope, Captain, the only ones strong enough to face the Council's might head-on." Ramos was silent for a long moment, the weight of destiny heavy on his shoulders. Then he nodded, decision made. "Very well, Admiral. Let's talk alliance. But betray us, and I promise you'll regret it." The two fleets joined forces, human and Yadarian ships intermixing in a show of newfound trust. In the war room of Ramos's flagship, the two leaders pored over star maps and intelligence reports, seeking any weakness in the Council's armor. "The key is Novarium," Cruz said, pointing to a cluster of systems on the map. "The Council's most jealously guarded resource. It powers everything from their ships to their quantum entanglement tech. Without it, their empire crumbles." Ramos leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Then that's our target. We hit their Novarium supply hard and fast, cripple their ability to wage war." Cruz nodded. "Agreed, and I know just where to start." He tapped a few commands, and the map zoomed in on a single planet, a swirling ball of red and black. Noxus Prime, the Council's primary Novarium processing facility. It's a fortress, heavily defended. But with your new weapons and our combined forces, "We might just have a shot," Ramos finished, the thrill of impending battle singing in his veins. "Then that's our play. We hit Noxus Prime with everything we've got. Cut the head off the snake." The planning session stretched long into the night, the two leaders hammering out every detail of the audacious assault. By the time they were done, Ramos felt a newfound respect for the Yadarian admiral. Cruz was a cunning strategist, a warrior to the core. Maybe this alliance wasn't such a bad idea after all. As the fleet set course for Noxus Prime, Ramos returned to the bridge, his mind awhirl with thoughts of the coming storm. This was it, the turning point of the war. Win here and they might just have a chance of toppling the Council's regime once and for all. But as they dropped out of warp on the edge of the system, Ramos felt a chill run down his spine. Arrayed before them was the full might of the Council's defenses, a wall of ships and gun platforms that seemed to stretch to infinity, and at their heart, a single massive dreadnought, its hull emblazoned with a familiar sigil. Zorg, the butcher of Zeta 9, the mastermind behind the Council's most brutal atrocities, and he was waiting for them. "Earlship's battle stations," Ramos roared, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Cruz, I hope your ships are ready for this, because we're going in and we're not stopping until that facility is dust." The Yadarian admiral's face was a mask of determination. "We're with you, Captain, to the end." And with that, the combined fleet surged forward, ancient weapons and rebel fury against the cold, implacable might of the Council. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, in the fire and blood of Noxus Prime. The battle was joined, the void lit by the flash of missiles and the flare of ruptured hulls. The Council ships came on in a relentless tide, their advanced shields shrugging off the humans' weapons like so much rain. But the ancient guns of the lost cache were another story entirely, their eldritch energies burning through the enemy's defenses like a hot knife through butter. Ramos stood at the heart of the maelstrom, his ship shuddering with each impact, sparks flying from overloaded consoles. They were hurting the Council, but not enough, not nearly enough. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, an endless stream of reinforcements pouring from the planet's surface. "We need to get boots on the ground," Cruz shouted over the comm, his own ship bucking under a barrage of plasma fire. "Take out that facility from the inside." Ramos gritted his teeth, mind racing. It was a desperate gamble, but what choice did they have? "Agreed, I'll lead the assault myself. Cruz, keep these bastards off our backs for as long as you can." "Give them hell, Captain," the Yadarian replied, a fierce grin splitting his face. "We'll hold the line." Ramos gathered his best Marines, the hardest, most battle-scarred veterans of the human fleet. They piled into the drop pods, checking weapons and sealing pressure suits, ready for the most important fight of their lives. The pods screamed through the atmosphere, trailing fire like meteors, dodging and weaving through the gauntlet of anti-air fire that rose to meet them. Ramos felt the bone-jarring impact as his pod slammed into the ferrocrete of the landing pad, the hatch blasting open to reveal a scene straight out of hell. Council troops swarmed across the pad, plasma rifles spitting death, the air thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. Ramos and his Marines poured out of the pods, ancient weapons roaring, cutting down the enemy with ruthless efficiency. They fought their way into the facility, a running battle through corridors of steel and flickering lights, the floor slick with blood and hydraulic fluid. Ramos led from the front, his armor scored and pitted, his face a mask of grim determination. At last they reached the heart of the complex, the vast Novarium reactor that powered the Council's ambitions. Ramos set the charges himself, prepping the ancient explosives with hands that never trembled, never hesitated. But as they turned to make their escape, a cold voice echoed through the chamber. "Leaving so soon, Captain?" Zorg stood in the doorway, flanked by a squad of his elite guards, their armor as black and lifeless as their master's heart. The Yadarian admiral smiled, a thin, cruel thing. "And here I thought we were just getting started." Ramos raised his rifle, the ancient weapon thrumming with barely restrained power. "It's over, Zorg. This ends now." The Yadarian laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "Oh, Captain, you have no idea what you've begun." And with that he charged, his guards fanning out in a lethal wave. Ramos met him head-on, the 2 leaders crashing together in a whirlwind of blades and armored fists, while all around them the facility shook with the fury of their battle. It was a close thing, a desperate, brutal affair. But in the end Ramos stood victorious, his blade buried in Zorg's chest, the Yadarian's lifeblood pooling on the cold metal floor. But even as he watched the light fade from his enemy's eyes, Ramos felt a chill of dread. Zorg's last words echoed in his mind, a final, taunting curse. "So you think this is victory, human? You've only delayed the inevitable. The Council will rise again, stronger than ever, and when they do, your precious Earth will burn." Ramos yanked his blade free, his face grim. Zorg was right. This was far from over. The Council was wounded but not broken, and they would stop at nothing to exact their revenge. The facility shook again, the charges reaching critical mass. Ramos turned to his Marines, his brothers and sisters in arms. "Move out! Double time!" They ran, racing the clock, the explosions nipping at their heels. And as they burst out into the smoke-filled sky, the Novarium reactor went critical behind them, a sun-bright blast that lit the darkness like a second dawn. In orbit, Cruz and the remains of the rebel fleet let out a ragged cheer as the facility disappeared in a bloom of nuclear fire. They had done it, struck a blow against the Council's war machine that would be felt across the galaxy. But as Ramos watched the mushroom cloud rise into the tortured sky, he felt no elation, no sense of triumph, only a grim, implacable resolve. Zorg's dying words haunted him, a promise of retribution yet to come. The Council would rebuild, would come for them again, and the next time they might not be so lucky. They had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. Ramos turned to Cruz, the weight of the future heavy on his shoulders. We need to find that backup supply, cut off the Council's Novarium at the source. It's the only way to end this, once and for all. Ramos clasped the Admiral's hand, a warrior's grip, a bond forged in blood and fire. Then let's get to work. We've got a universe to save. With the secret of the Galactic Council's hidden Novarium cache uncovered, Ramos and Cruz plotted their next move with grim determination. They pored over every scrap of intel, every whispered rumor and intercepted transmission, piecing together the clues that would lead them to their target. At last they had it, a set of coordinates pointing to an uncharted system on the fringes of Council space, a system that, according to their sources, was home to a secret research facility where the Council was hoarding its ill-gotten Novarium. Ramos and Cruz rallied their battered fleets, human and Yadirian rebels united in common cause. They knew they were racing against time, that the Council would stop at nothing to protect its most valuable asset. They had to strike now, before the enemy could regroup and fortify their position. As they dropped out of warp on the edge of the system, the Allied fleet was met with a sight that chilled even the most battle-hardened veterans to the bone. Arrayed before them was a Council armada of staggering size and power, a wall of gleaming ships bristling with weapons, and at its heart, a monstrous flagship that dwarfed even the mightiest dreadnoughts in Ramos's fleet. "All ships, engage!" Ramos roared over the fleet-wide comm, his voice steady even as his heart raced. "We've come too far to turn back now. Let's show these Council bastards what we're made of." The space between the two fleets erupted into a maelstrom of fire and debris as the battle was joined. The Council ships were formidable, their shields shrugging off the Allied barrage, their weapons carving through hull and armor with merciless precision. The flagship was a beast, its massive cannons spitting sun-bright beams of pure destruction that vaporized entire squadrons of fighters in the blink of an eye. But the rebels fought with the desperate ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose. The ancient human weapons sang their deadly song, tearing through the Council's defenses like they were made of paper. Cruz's Yadirian ships darted and weaved through the chaos, their nimble attacks drawing the enemy's fire away from the lumbering human dreadnoughts. Slowly, painfully, the rebel fleet clawed its way through the Council blockade, leaving a trail of shattered ships and frozen corpses in their wake. But the cost was high. For every enemy vessel they destroyed, they lost 2 of their own, the void lit by the funeral pyres of the fallen. At last, they broke through to the planet's surface, the remaining ships disgorging their troops in a rain of drop pods and landing craft. Ramos and Cruz led the charge, their boots crunching on the alien soil as they stormed towards the research facility looming on the horizon. The ground battle was a brutal close-quarters affair, the rebel troops facing off against the Council's most fearsome defenders, genetically engineered super-soldiers, their bodies augmented with cybernetic enhancements and Novarium-powered weaponry. The air sang with the whine of pulse rifles and the sizzle of plasma, the earth trembling beneath the tread of hulking battle mechs. But the rebels pressed on, driven by a righteous fury that no amount of high-tech wizardry could match. They fought their way into the heart of the facility, room by blood-soaked room, until at last they stood before their prize, a cavernous chamber filled with row upon row of gleaming Novarium canisters, enough to power the Council's war machine for a generation. Ramos and Cruz wasted no time, planting demolition charges with practiced efficiency. They had what they came for. Now they just had to make it out in one piece. But as they turned to make their escape, a chilling transmission crackled over their comms. The Council flagship had unleashed a new weapon, a devastating cannon fueled by the very Novarium they sought to destroy. Even now, it was tearing through the rebel fleet in orbit, leaving nothing but drifting wreckage and flash-frozen bodies in its wake. Ramos and Cruz shared a look of grim understanding. They both knew what had to be done. The Novarium had to be destroyed, the flagship's terrible weapon neutralized, no matter the cost. Cruz's hand hovered over the detonator, hesitating for the briefest of moments. In that instant, Ramos saw the weight of the galaxy in his allies' eyes, the burden of the billions of lives hanging in the balance. Then, with a nod and a whispered prayer to whatever gods might be listening, Cruz pressed the button. The world went white, a searing, blinding radiance that consumed everything in its path, the facility disappearing in a roiling cloud of plasma and vaporized metal. The explosion ripped through the planet's crust, setting off a devastating chain reaction that spread across the globe like a ravenous wildfire. Ramos and Cruz barely made it to their shuttle in time, the shockwaves nipping at their heels as they rocketed away from the dying planet. From orbit, they watched in numb silence as the world below was scoured clean, the Council's precious novarium reduced to so much irradiated ash on the solar winds. In the end, they had achieved their objective. The Council's war machine would grind to a shuddering halt, starved of the vital resource it needed to function. But the victory was a hollow one, paid for with the lives of countless rebels and innocents caught in the crossfire. As the battered remnants of the Allied fleet limped back to their respective homeworlds, Ramos and Cruz could only wonder what the future would hold. The Council had been dealt a devastating blow, but they were far from defeated. And the scars left by the war, both physical and spiritual, would linger for generations to come. But for now there was only the long journey home, and the knowledge that they had fought the good fight, no matter how high the price. The galaxy had been forever changed by their actions, and perhaps one day it would change for the better. The journey back from the shattered planet was a somber one, the weight of their Pyrrhic victory hanging heavy on Ramos and Cruz's shoulders. As they limped towards their respective homeworlds, the scattered remnants of their once mighty fleets trailing behind them, a grim realization began to dawn. The Novarium stockpile, the linchpin of the Council's power, lay in ruins, but its destruction had unleashed a maelstrom of chaos across the galaxy. With the Council's iron grip shattered, long-simmering tensions and ancient rivalries flared to life once more. Whispers reached Ramos's ears of Kraloxian warbands raiding Beldari colonies, of Zigerian slavers preying on the shipping lanes with impunity. To make matters worse, the ancient weapons, the salvation that had delivered them victory at such terrible cost, had begun to turn against them. Reports filtered in of ships racked by debilitating radiation poisoning, their crews writhing in agony as the exotic matter that powered the guns seeped into their bones. With heavy hearts, Ramos gave the order to jettison the corrupted weapons on a barren, nameless world, consigning them to a lonely grave. But not before dozens of his own people paid the price, their lives leached away by the very tools that had saved them. As the galaxy teetered on the brink, torn between the spectre of anarchy and the yawning power vacuum left by the Council, Ramos and Cruz faced a monumental choice: to retreat to the safety of their own worlds, to weather the oncoming storm as best they could, or to step into the breach, to forge a new order from the ashes of the old. For Ramos there was no choice at all. He had not come this far, sacrificed so much to slink away now, and so a new alliance was born, a fragile coalition of humans, Yadirian rebels, and a smattering of other races who shared their vision of a just and free galaxy. But the road ahead would be far from smooth. At every turn, their efforts to stabilize the situation were met with fierce resistance. Renegade warlords and opportunistic despots, scenting weakness, sought to carve out their own bloody fiefdoms amid the chaos. Cruz himself barely survived an assassination attempt by a fanatical Zigerian slaver cult, the bomb meant for him, claiming the lives of a dozen of his most trusted lieutenants instead. With options dwindling and hope fading fast, Ramos and Cruz played their final card. Gathering a hand-picked fleet of their most loyal followers, they set course for the very heart of the galaxy, where ancient star charts and whispered legends hinted at a power that could bring stability to the reeling galaxy. But when they arrived at those fabled coordinates, they found not salvation but damnation. A vast alien intelligence, a machine god that called itself the Overseer, awaited them in the churning heart of a supermassive black hole. In a voice that shook the stars, it spoke to them of the truth behind the Council, of the great game it had played with the galaxy's races as its pawns. The overseer, it claimed, had created the council as a means to enforce order, to prevent the myriad species under its charge from descending into ruinous warfare. But with its tools broken and its plans in tatters, it had arrived at a cold equation. The galaxy, riven by strife and chaos, had become a liability, a threat to the overseer's inscrutable designs, and so, with the dispassionate finality of a machine, it had decided to wipe the slate clean, to reset the board and begin the game anew. Ramos and Cruz, staring into that abyss, found themselves faced with an impossible choice: to submit to the will of this machine tyrant, to allow their worlds and all they held dear to be consigned to oblivion, or to fight, to rage against the dying of the light, no matter how hopeless the cause. In the end, there was no choice at all. Faced with the annihilation of all they had fought to protect, they chose defiance, chose to stand one last time against the dark. Ramos and Cruz rallied the tattered remnants of the free galaxy, every ship and soldier they could muster. Zygarian raiders flew alongside Beldari frigates. Kraloxian warlords stood shoulder to shoulder with human marines. A ragtag armada, forged in the crucible of desperation, ready to make their final stand. And so in the shadow of that terrible machine god, the battle to end all battles was joined. The overseer's defenses were nigh impenetrable, its weapons unimaginably vast. For every fighter that darted through its firing arcs, a dozen were swatted from the sky like gnats. For every torpedo that managed to slip through its point defenses, 100 more detonated harmlessly against its implacable hull. But Ramos and Cruz fought on, rallying their forces again and again, hurling themselves against the overseer's might, with reckless abandon. They knew they could not win, not truly, but perhaps, if they could buy just a little more time, bloodied the machine just enough, perhaps the spark they had kindled could endure, perhaps the galaxy could learn to stand on its own, free of the overseer's shackles. In the end, as the last of their ships burned and the last of their comrades fell, Ramos and Cruz made their choice. In a final, desperate gambit, they turned their own failing ships towards the heart of the overseer, setting their reactors to overload. As the machine god's defenses tore them apart, they consigned their souls to the void, the light of their passing eclipsed by the cataclysmic blast that followed. The overseer, struck a mortal blow by their sacrifice, shuddered and collapsed in on itself, imploding into the black hole that had been its womb and its tomb, and with its passing, the galaxy stood, for the first time in eons, free. But the price had been incalculable. The Great Armada was shattered, the worlds of the Alliance reeling from the loss of their greatest heroes. And yet, as the dust settled and the echoes of that final battle faded, a new hope began to kindle. The races of the galaxy, tested in the forge of this ultimate struggle, began to come together as never before. Old hatreds and rivalries, if not forgotten, were at least set aside in the face of their shared trauma, their collective brush with extinction. The legend of Ramos and Cruz, the great heroes who had given their lives so that the galaxy might live, spread to every corner of the stars. The once derided humans found themselves held up as paragons, exemplars of the virtues of courage and self-sacrifice. But even as the galaxy began to rebuild, the scars of the war lingered. Great swathes of the cosmos lay ravaged and broken, haunted by the ghosts of the fallen. The new alliance, for all its promise, remained a fragile thing, beset by 1,000 challenges and threats. But they would face those challenges as one, guided by the memory of those who had given all to secure their future. It would be a long road, a hard road, but it was at last their road to walk. And walk it they would together. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.